Okay, now that you've got your short block together, here comes the time to check a few things. One, piston to valve clearance. Shouldn't have an issue with this motor because of the lift. It's only like a 0.510 lift, so I don't expect any clearance issues. Another thing we gotta check is valve train geometry, which it gets overlooked a lot. And get the right push rod length. We gotta mock up a cylinder, and what you gotta do is you can buy a spring, or you can go to the hardware store and buy a spring that pushes. What we're going to do is pull out valve springs and replace the valve spring with this. And that's going to hold the valve shut. But it's going to be weak enough so when you crank your motor over with a hydraulic lifter, your plunger won't sink into your lifter. It will push this fucking valve open. What we're going to do is you can use clay or Play-Doh. In this instance, I can't fucking find any Play-Doh. So we're using regular dough for a pie as well. I made an apple pie earlier, and I got dough left over. But anyway, you put your putty in here, put the head on, rotate the motor a few times, so your valves open and close. Then we're going to take the head off and measure the thickness of that dough, and that gives you your valve clearance. So anyway, I'm going to go put this in the cylinder head, and I'll be back. Another thing, you need your gasket in place, or a used one, or you can shim it. You know, you can stick feeler gauges under each end or whatnot till you get the thickness of your gasket. Okay, I'm going to put the distributor in. I still need the O-ring for it. I'm going to have to order it from MSD because I checked in my O-ring kit, both standard and metric, nothing fits. So it's going to be some MSD special bullshit only. But anyway, before you drop your distributor in, you're going to be at the end of your compression stroke and on your power stroke. To do this, there's two ways you can do it. Pull the valve cover and watch your motor. The intake valve is going to open. It's going to close. Then you want to line your timing marks up, put your distributor in. The other way is with the finger. You can put your finger in number 1 hole, not the number 2. Put it in number 1 and crank the motor, and you're going to feel pressure. It's going to want to blow your finger out of the hole. From that point, just slowly roll the motor over until you line your timing mark up. Then your distributor is ready to go in. Now if you watch, see the intake valve open? That's the intake. It's opening, it's drawing your air and fuel in. Now it's going to start closing. And what's that doing is that's on its compression stroke. That's when it's compressing all the air and fuel that is just sucked into that cylinder. Now you keep rolling the motor over till you line your fucking 0 mark to about your 12-degree mark on your timing tab. That way when you drop your distributor in, you're already going to have 12 degrees advanced on your distributor. If you put it in at 0, the motor's not going to start. You have to turn the distributor, crank it, turn it some more, and crank it till it starts. You don't want to do that. You want this thing to start. Doesn't matter if it starts and stalls, but you don't want it backfiring and all that bullshit. So put it in, around 8 to 12 degrees advanced. That'll give you enough time so it actually start. And it should idle on its own as long as the idle screw is wound in enough. That's all there is to it. Okay, before you drop your distributor in, you need to make sure your oil pump shaft is going to line up with your gear. Now on a normal HEI distributor, you usually want your rotor button pointing over to your number 1 area. Technically it doesn't matter where the fuck it is, as long as your firing order is correct, but normally you want it pointing out here somewhere in this general area. HEIs, the fact, and that's all you do. All you do is just push this down in your valve pocket. You basically want to just measure your valve pocket is what you're doing here, and checking the clearance on it. But you push that in like that. If you're going to do both, if I had 2 springs, I could do both valves at the same time, but I don't. So what I do is I'm going to do the intake valve first, pull the head back off, swap the spring on the exhaust side, put the dough over here, put the head back on, and do it again. Okay, the first thing I usually do here, and normally you can mark this up the way you're, with your rocker and all that stuff, to do the rotation. I use this time to check for push rod length. Now there's a couple different ways to check your push rod length, but the easiest fucking way is with a length checker tool. Now to use this, you're going to be on the base circle of your cam. You don't want to be up on your lobe. So the valve would want to be closed, lift her all the way down on the base of the fucking lobe. Now, this is with a stock push rod, and that's what you always want to start with. Now if you see there's a gap here, that means that push rod's too long. This needs to sit down, and then the push rod just wants to touch that. So we got to know what the distance between here and here is. Well, there's a few ways you can do that, but the simplest way is find something that fits in that fucking hole and then measure the thickness of it. Now there's quite a gap. Now what I got here is a guide plate half. Now you slide that in there, and it takes up about half that distance. So what we'll do, we're going to slide another one in. And with that sitting up there, that there, the gap's taken up. Now this is where you want to start. You measure the thickness of these. They're 250 thousandths. Then you subtract that from this push rod. So we know if we get a push rod that's that much shorter than this one, we're going to be in the ballpark of the correct push rod length. And that would be 7.5, which is a stock small block Mopar. So I could grab a small block Mopar push rod and put it in there and see how it fits. Now these, something you should have, are adjustable push rods. You can buy 2. I keep one for backup. I only use them usually one at a time. And what that does, you can screw this in or out and make the push rod adjustable fucking lengths. And they're pretty fucking cool. So all you do is you put that in there like this, how we have it right now, and wind that push rod so it's the length you want it. Lock the 2 nuts so it doesn't move. Then you put that next to your stock push rod, then measure the distance. Then that's the size that you need. So anyway, here's the new push rods. These are the new generation LT ones, but it's 100 over. So that puts this at 5.7, and this is the old stock one. And as you can see, the new one's shorter. So, let's stick that the fuck in and see where that puts us. Okay. Now if you see, we're up off our guide plate. You got a gap in there. It's straight up. We're flat here. And there's no air between the valve and the tool. So for this motor, the 5.7 is the correct length. Normally, if you're going to run aluminum heads, normally you need 100 over than stock. So normally you need 100 thousandths longer than a stock push rod to run the average aluminum head. But where this is a roller cam setup, the lifters are taller than a stock lifter, so that it actually overcompensates. So I need a shorter push rod than stock. Where normally, if this was a hydraulic flat tappet cam, I'd probably have to get 100 over push rod. But I don't want to confuse it. But anyway, that's how you check the push rod length. So now, what we got to do is with the push rod you're using in, now I got to put the rocker arm that I'm going to use and adjust it to 0 lash. Okay. Now this, another thing you get, these Pro Comp heads, especially these Pro Comp heads I should say, location of items aren't perfect. And normally when you got a guide plate, they're a one piece. That's it. You put them in, the holes line up, and you put your studs in. Well, the ones I use here are 2-piece adjustable pusher guide plates. And as you can see, I can move it around and have that push rod in different spots. Now, ideally, in theory, that has to be a perfect line, right straight across the valve, your rocker stud, and your push rod. It wants to be fucking right straight, just like timing marks on your cam if you're going to put it in straight up. But through fucking different machine holes, you got this hole, and that port wall has to allow for perfect fucking straight line measurements. And it's hard to get. And as you can see, when I move this back and forth, the rocker arm goes different side to side. Well, I want to adjust that fucking guide plate so my valve is in the fucking center of my roller. When that's there, and I've got clearance around the push rod, I can lock that plate down, and that's where it's going to live. Okay. Now these are 3/8 studs of the roller cam. It's got a little bit of spring pressure. Do not use the Pro Comp studs. Pull them out, throw them away, but get ARPs. The fucking things will break. Now this is a poly lock for a stud girdle. And this is where the stud girdle is going to sit. And you see they're going to sit out quite high. To run these with a stud girdle, you need tall valve covers. You can't run a fucking short one. Okay, so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate the guide plate like I told you, and then tighten the stud and lock that in place. Okay. Now I've got my fucking rocker centered on the fucking valve tip. The stud locked down, holding the guide plate. And I've got this set to 0 lash. And all that is, put it together and you tighten this down with no oil on this fucking push rod, and just lightly fucking spin it as you tighten this. real slow and gently. That push rod will stop. When that does, stop that. Lock that down. That's zero lash. And when we get to this point, all we do is roll the motor over a few times to get this valve to open and close. Now, as you noticed earlier, I used a pipe wrench or some fucking tape, adjustable wrench, to turn this motor. Now you can buy a crankshaft tool, you know, to spin your fucking crank. It's a waste of money. I mean, you can have it hanging on the wall or in the toolbox. Something to fucking talk to your fucking friends about, say you got, and you fucking try to look cool or whatnot. But it's a waste of money, even though it ain't much. But you do need one of these tools. And all I'm using right now to turn the motor with is this. This is a harmonic balancer installer. You fucking need one of these. And all you do is put it in, put the wrench on, and use that to turn the motor. Now, I'm going to set you in here. If I can really see what's going on or not. You can't see good from there. Let me tighten it back up. Is that alright? Okay, that ain't bad there, I guess. Sorry for the jiggy camera, but I watched a few of these videos and they don't really show nothing. All they do is basically show some fucking dude over here behind this fucking motor and talking and yapping. I'm trying to... I mean, I don't give a fuck about being in the picture, personally, but I'm trying to get you a fucking shot up close so you can actually see what's going on. So if you want to see somebody in the video doing this, go somewhere else, because I'm just trying to show you the actual what it's doing. Now right here the exhaust is opening, closing, now the intake will open. Right, you want to roll past so it's back down on your lobe. Now, that valve opened and then closed. And that should leave an impression in that Play-Doh. And what we'll do is cut that in half and measure the thickness of it, and that gives us our intake valve clearance, which can be tighter than the exhaust. The exhaust runs hotter, so you need more. So, is there anything else really happening right now? Okay, another thing you can check right now is your retainer to rocker clearance. And as you can see, we got plenty. If you have an issue, like if you're running aluminum rocker, if you've got big fat aluminum rockers, sometimes you have a clearance issue in here. And even some metal ones on the bigger fucking retainers. Just take your die grinder and go in there and clearance it. So you have the clearance you want. And after, sand it smooth again. As the burr from the die grinder will leave sharp teeth looking things, which can actually cause it to crack in those spots, so you want to make it smooth again. Get all the stress risers out of it. Okay, now as you can see, that valve barely touched it. So I know that I have plenty of fucking valve clearance. But anyway, you cut through the fucking center and peel your dough out. And that distance from here to there, that's what you have for clearance. This one we have plenty. Minimum, you want at least, fuck, I don't know, at least 80 thousandths, preferably 100 thousandths clearance. And as you can see, I mean, fuck, we've got 320 thousandths. So that's plenty. I mean, if you have that much, call it a 1/16, you're good to go. Now what I'm gonna fucking shut this off, and I'm gonna do the exhaust, then we'll move on from there. Okay, there's the exhaust. And again, as you can see, we got plenty. Okay. Say you didn't have enough clearance. The only solution is to fucking cut the pockets. There's usually plenty of metal underneath these pockets. You can always map out the dome of your piston if you want, just so you can measure the thickness. But yeah, I mean, that's, you know, other than putting a thicker gasket, which will lower your compression and your cylinder pressure. And you don't want to do that, so you'd have to pull the pistons and have them fly cut. The pockets deeper. Okay, well, I'm taking this apart to clean. I want to talk to you about the degree bushings. As you can see, as I showed you before, they have an offset hole in them. That's to advance or retard the camshaft. Normally, if you're going to do anything with them, you'd advance it. And what that does, it helps bring your power band down lower in your RPM scale. Builds cylinder pressure. And I gotta tell you, I see a lot of overcammed street motors. Or under compression, however way you want to look at it. But advancing your cam will increase cylinder pressure. And that's what it all comes down to, is cylinder pressure. Compression ratio really don't matter. It's what you have for cylinder pressure, which is what you check with a compression gauge when you crank it over. But anyway, as you can see, it's got an offset hole. And what that does is that moves the cam gear. Well, actually it moves the camshaft. The gear stays like lined up to your dots. Right? Say that the gear is dot to dot. And if you move that bushing from here to here, it's going to back your cam up a little bit. With a high spot on top, it's going to push your cam down. So just remember that. High is advanced. Thick on the bottom's retard. Okay. Now as you can see, I've got the dots lined up. I had a guy fucking take a motor apart that somebody did for him that wasn't running quite right. And he called me up and said, this guy put his cam in wrong. And it's like, what do you mean, wrong? He said, the dots don't line up. They're supposed to be dot to dot. One dot on the crank is up, and the dot on the camshaft is up. And they're supposed to be dot to dot. It's like, yeah, turn the fucking motor over one fucking rotation, they'll line back up. The cam turns fucking half the speed as your crankshaft, which is what turns your fucking oil pump, is your camshaft. And that's why you don't ever want to fucking take a fresh motor and disconnect your distributor and crank the fucking thing over into your starter trying to build oil pressure. It doesn't turn fast enough to build oil pressure. You want that motor to start instantly. Don't sit and crank the fucking thing. If you want to fucking prime oil into your motor, buy the fucking oil pump tool to fucking crank it and pressurize your system. You know, you spin it with a drill. I don't pressurize my systems. I don't have one. I lube them good when I put them together. They go in and they fire right up and they're good to go. But anyway, I'll show you. I'm going to crank this motor one rotation and you'll see the dot will go from here to here. So when you're putting them in, if your dot's at 12 o'clock or 6 o'clock and your crank is at 12, you're good to go. I'm not going to show you the whole degree system. Most of you people don't have a degree wheel. There's nothing to it. You buy the kit, it comes with the directions, just follow them. I mean, it's real simple. But as a general rule, if you're using, say, a comp cam, and you're using comp cam timing chain set, you'll be good to go. I've never seen one off. The only time you run into problems really is when you're using the cheap Taiwan shit, because the tolerance aren't quite If you're going to run an advanced cam or a retarded cam, always have that bushing in when you're doing your piston valve clearance. Because advancing the cam will eat up your fucking piston to valve clearance on your intake and give you more on exhaust. And vice versa if you retard it. You lose on your exhaust and gain on your intake. This motor has plenty. I could put 6-degree bushing in this thing and not worry about piston to valve clearance. You know, as you saw, we have plenty. Okay, I'm getting ready to set. Double check my clearance on the thrust and on the other gear. And for that, I'll show you. It's almost like doing the piston thing. I'm going to put a little bit piece of dough in here and here. Push the timing cover off and pull it off. Then I'll slice them and see how much clearance is, you know, see how thick they are, and that will be the clearance. Just want to make a little note here on sealing your motor up. As you see, I'm just putting some fucking little mouse poop dots here. I take a lot of motors apart that are filled with silicone, professionally built or whatnot. It's not good. You don't need to fucking run a big bead. It's just all you're using this stuff for is to seal a gasket. You're not making a gasket out of this stuff. That's what your gasket's for. You just want a thin layer of stuff on here to help seal it. And that's, you know, take up any imperfections in the fucking metal. Don't necessarily need to use a silicone. I like the 3M. I mean, not 3M, GE. Comes in a fucking tube and use it with a caulking gun. If I'm doing a couple motors at a time, I'll buy a tube because it's like $3, or this fucking little tube is like $6. But anyway, that's all you need to do. A few dots around it, and just take a finger and smear it out. And anywhere it's going to be in towards an edge, what I like to do is push my fucking finger on it and fucking run it right down it. And that'll give you a little bit of squish room before it actually, you know, if you don't do that, when you put it on and tighten it down, it'll squish out and you can see it out around your parts. I don't really like seeing that. Not a big deal. I mean, when I do, you know it's fucking sealed. But when I see it, the first thing I think is excessive silicone, and it's plugging up the oil pump and whatnot. But this is just a thin layer. It shouldn't squeeze through at all. But just to be safe, I do this. And as you can see, I'm just wiping the edges off. I have cut myself doing this, so sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But all you're doing is, you know, literally pushing your finger right into it, or a little, you know, corner of a rag. All you do is put the time, you know, check the clearances on the timing cover, and then I'm going to put the harmonic balancer on and check top dead center and make sure it's right. That's something you want to have. You want to make sure your top dead center is top dead center, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, there's our squished pieces. Now, as you can see, the idle gear has a good 1/16. Plenty of space. If I can find a fucking razor blade. There's what we have for clearance on our idle gear. Good to go there. Now as you can see, we got a lot of squish off the thrust button. It's in all the way. But it's paper thin. So we do not have enough clearance here on the thrust button. Now if you remember, I ground the shit out of the back side of it. Alright, so now I gotta take some off of here. Don't need to take a lot, just need to, you know. Right now we've got probably 5 thousandths clearance, and I want more than that. So I'm gonna grind some of this off, and again I'll set the Play-Doh up there, actually it's dough, and check it again. Okay, I'll get it all ground down. What I use is just a 4.5 inch fucking electric grinder. Lightly clamped into some vice grips. You get your grinding wheel just right, and this will spin at the same time. And you can do the face of this really nice and evenly. Don't do this anywhere near your motor unless you wrap that fucker up in plastic. A big trash bag will work, you know, those contractor bags. Now, like any bearing, and of course, like any grinding, the time you're grinding, you get metal fucking filings thrown everywhere. Those sparks that you see come off a grinder, that's hot fucking metal flying out of there. So, what you want to do is take this apart, just remove that clip, pull that off. You're going to have a washer, the roller bearing, and another washer. Take that apart and wash it really good. If you don't want to take it apart, at least get in there with a good brake cleaner and blast the shit out of that. You don't want to put it together dirty. Another thing I like to do before I put it in, put a blob of oil down in there. It's a bearing, people. Don't fire it up dry. If you put that in there with no oil, it's going to be a few fucking minutes before this gets oil. Because that's going to fucking go in like that. And as you can see, your bearing is almost blocked. So to get oil onto this, that has to splash on, drip off, whatnot. It's going to be a while. Don't take the chance. Put a little bit of oil on it, and put it in. Now I'm going to fold these over. Whenever you're using if you're using a timing bushing, you know, degree bushing, you always got to have a plate, because if not, that fucking bushing will come out. Torque these down, bend your tabs, dab silicone on the gasket, then smear it like I did before. Then I can put the timing cover on. And there's a look before I put the cover on. It's in place, tabs are bent over. I had to loosen these two bolts and take a screwdriver and hold the washers out while I tighten the bolts, because they were blocking the thrust button. I couldn't get it in. Other than that, no big deal. Smear some silicone on it, and you gotta put the cover on. Okay, put the balancer on now. It's a Summit piece. It's for a street dampener. I don't know if it's fucking race approved or not. I don't think so. But it's like a stock one. It's 2-piece with a rubber insert. Tool that you're going to need to buy, like I said before, is this installer. You're also going to need a remover. If you clamp this with a 3-jaw puller and pull on the outer ring, you can separate the 2 pieces. These are just glued together. So you have to pull on your center hub. I've seen people beat them on. I'll be honest, I've done it myself in a fucking jam. I've seen people, you know, flat face, you know, put a hammer, then beat another hammer or block of wood and beat it on. You don't want to do that because it can cause a separation between the two. When you hit this, this wants to move instantly and this doesn't. Kind of like you got a loose hammer handle, an axe head or something like that. You hold that and as you hit this end of it, it will tighten that up. It works the same way. You're knocking it and it's going to fucking separate. So buy the installer. There's nothing to it. You just turn the fucking nut. When you start getting down, sometimes the motor will spin. You got to hold this with another wrench. Anyway, I'm going to put this on. Then I'll show you how far off the fucking timing cover is. Okay, the balancer is on. Also, I want to make a note. Before you put the balancer on, to lube your fucking spline that goes in the seal. You get that fucking, the neck slides in the seal. You don't want to put it in dry, you can burn your seal up. You know, so smear some oil on it. White grease is nice. Okay, now we haven't found true top dead center yet. This might be off a couple degrees, but as you can see, it's pretty fucking close to top dead center if it's not top dead center. Now you look here, see the timing tab? This is 0 right here on the tab, but 0 on the dampener is over here, so you're 6 degrees off, which means a lot. That's why it's good to know what you're doing and always double check the parts. On another note, there's a few different balancers out there. You got the smaller one, you got a bigger one. And of course the bigger one's heavy. And the heavier your parts are, the slower your motor wants to rev. So always use the smaller parts. The lighter parts that you can will allow the motor to rev quicker. Assuming you got compression in the can to allow it to do that. Anyway, I'll show you how to do your top. Make sure you got top dead center. Then we can cut this fucking tab so we line up to our 0 mark. And another note, Chevy changed the timing marks throughout the years. Some are over here and some are up here. Now if you put this on a mid-80s motor, which has a timing mark up here, you're going to be all fucked up when you try to put a timing light on it. That's why it's important to know where top dead center is. And say you want to put this on a motor with a timing tab up here. Once you get top dead center, you can just take a cutoff wheel or a hacksaw and make the line right in your dampener to line up to your tab. Okay. Now I can't find my doohickey that I made, and all it is a piece of flat metal that comes out and is bent down. And I normally bolt it in here with a head bolt. And what that will do, when I turn the motor over, it's going to come up and hit that piece and stop. Then I mark the balancer, spin it back the other way and it stops, and I mark the balancer. Now in between that is top dead center. And you can mark your tab and balancer so they line up. So I'm using here as a door striker out of a car and a big washer. Now when I tighten that down, actually that ain't gonna work. I need to get a head bolt. Okay, I've got that in place. Now I do is crank it up. You'll see it stops. Right? Now say this was a stock balancer and you want to index it to your timing tab. You'd find a reference point and mark it. and turn the motor backwards till that comes up and hit. And on the same reference point, you'd mark the balancer. Now you see 2 marks? We know that right between them 2 marks is top dead center without a question. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get top dead center on the motor with an indicator. Then I'm going to cut the timing tab because I'm not going to scribe the balancer. But I'm going to see it's off a little bit. Now here's what I do to find the center. Is I run tape on it, then I mark where my marks are. You line your 2 marks up. And you fold that in half. Now right where that fold line is the half of, is the very center of these 2 marks. Following along? Now, you put that tape back on your marks. And that mark right there is top dead center on that balancer. And as you can see, this balancer is 4 degrees off on the markings. And that's why you check things, because nothing's made perfect. But I'm not going to worry about the balancer being off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find top dead center with the indicator. So once I do that, we'll cut the timing tab to line up to the 0 mark on the balancer. Then we'll be good to go. Okay, I've got this set up, and as you can see, I've got it preloaded. About 10 thousandths. What that means, with no load on this, it will, the hand will be up. So right now there's nothing on it. So I can roll this back here. God, clamp loosened up. I can zero it out right there. Now this is reading thousandths. You get your 5 10 thousandths, which is 0.005, 0.010. 1 revolution is 100 thousandths, which would be your 0.1. Anyway, when I set it up, I preload it. Now, as you can see, I back the motor off, the needle goes down. Right? Rotate it forward, it goes up. Now you see where it stopped, it started going back down. That point's going to be top dead center, which is almost 27 thousandths. So right there is going to be top dead center. So what we need to do is cut the timing tab right here. I can't find my black marker. I don't know where the fuck it is. I'm going to take the cutoff wheel and cut that chunk out. And that will be our 0 mark. Hey, I got the piece cut out. Now this line here now will be 0. And the 4 is no longer 4, it's 2. You know, these are all 2-degree markings. But I want to make a note on timing tabs. I'm using this even though I hate them. Because as you can see, a little bit of movement changes everything. But there, we got 0. Now they make an adjustable one. It's an aluminum one that bolts on. It's got a pin. You can adjust it. Those are slick as shit. I like them. But trying to keep costs down. I mean, it's not like money's not a problem with this guy, but I don't want to waste his money either. So it's a street motor. Once it's fucking timed and tuned, it's done. You know, it's not be going the racetrack and bumping time and upper back and fucking with it every fucking time you get down the track. So this will suffice. Yeah, that's all there is to it. So, hopefully you're following along so far. The next step is doing the headwork. I'm not going to get crazy because, like I said, it's a street motor. I do want to improve the flow a little bit. So I'm going to go in and do some pocket work. I'm not going to do anything in the combustion chamber. They're perfect as they are. They came from Skip White Performance. I don't know if the Whites did the fucking CNC on them or if they buy them like that. I don't know. But I did CC them. And they're all dead on at 64. I'm going to CC one for you so you can see how to do it. Yeah. Then I'm going to go in and clean up the pockets a little bit where they put the seats in. The Whites cleaned them up better than the fucking Pro Comp does. Normally there's a big fucking lip in there. But I just want to go in and clean them up a little bit. Not going to do any port work really. I back cut the intake valves to help the low lift flow a little bit. I'll talk to you about that a little bit though. But not right now. I got to charge the battery. Okay. Now I'm moving on to the heads. The heads are where you're going to get most of your power and your torque along with your camshaft. If you think you're going to get a pair of old 882 heads from an old fucking 70s truck, spend a few minutes with a die grinder in there, or in most cases a fucking Dremel. I think you're going to make 500 horse. You're not. If you're stuck using fucking stock heads, use the Vortec heads. You can make 420, 400 with those heads without even fucking with them. Okay, now first we're going to do is CC the fucking head. Now I use is just old fucking grease. And just like the Permatex, you need just a thin layer around your chamber. And you have to have your spark plug in, the one you're going to use, the heat range you're going to use. A different heat range can change your CC volume. Anyway, put some grease around it. Vaseline would probably work, but most people doing this bullshit have grease sitting around. And clean it out of your combustion chamber. Is any blobs hanging in your chamber will change your fucking readings. And just like the Permatex, I try to fucking clean the fucking edge onto the surface a little bit, because when you push the plate down, it will squish in, and you don't really want that. But anyway, the plate is just a piece of plexiglass with a hole. When you do these, you gotta have your heads at an angle, because the air travels upward. And you want to put the plate in at the highest point of the combustion chamber. And push down. I'm pushing pretty hard on it. And you'll see that all the air comes out of it on the grease, and it's fucking sealed. Now the next thing you're going to need is a barrette of some sort. This is one of those glass $100 ones you get from Summit. I do a lot of Mopars. And the Mopars are a pretty good size head, you know, up in the 70s and 80 cc area. So I got a 100 cc barrette. You can know a guy that uses a little small handheld one. They work fine. Now this setup comes with a stand and clamp, so you could actually fucking, you know, clamp this and hold it in place. I don't fuck with it. I use it by hand. Now you need to fill this with a liquid. I use kerosene. You don't want to use water. Anyway, overfill it. As you can see, it has a little petcock on it. Now what you want to do, now that you fill it more than what it has. Zero mark is right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the petcock until that fluid comes down to the 0 mark. Now, as you can see, I don't know if you can read it, but it's right there. Okay, now that the barrette's full, you come back here. Might be a pain in the ass to do with the camera there, but let me get down so I can hug this fucker. The tip of the hole and open the petcock. Now when I start getting filled, I slow this thing down. You don't want to spill it. Oh, just shake the head a little bit. We got an air pocket. We got some trapped air over here. If that happens, just tilt it till you get the air out. Now you can see inside the hole, I'm at the bottom of my glass. And I am right at 64 cc, which is what these heads are supposed to be, and that's exactly what they are. Now there, that's not fucking hard, is it? Now, these are all CC combustion chamber. They're all exactly 64. I have checked them. Now what you'd be doing, so you got these set of heads, and they're not CNC'd. You got to do this to every fucking combustion chamber and find your largest one. And that, you know, if you get a set of heads and they're rated at 64, don't take it for granted that they are 64. They're not going to be. But find your largest chamber and equalize it. You know, go in there with a die grinder or whatnot, and make the combustion chamber all the same size. And if they're, you know, if you want 64 and you end up with 67s, all you got to do is take a machine shop and mill the deck surface down a little bit, and that'll shrink your combustion chambers down. Now, I'm going to shut you off while I drain this fluid out. It gets kind of messy, but it's not a big deal. All I do is set this out over the fucking bench and take the spark plug out that comes out the spark plug hole. Okay. I'm going to go in and clean these the bowls up a little bit, and under the seat area where the machine the seats in. Get a good blend going here. I'm not really going to do any port work. I don't think they need it. I clean up a little bit. I think most of the work going to be on the intake. Okay. Anyway, say you get a set of heads and you want to do some port work or gasket match or whatnot. Gasket matching is fine. I advise against fucking people that don't know what the fuck they're doing to do any port work. If you don't have a flow bench or access to one, I don't recommend doing any port work. It is so easy to fucking hurt the fucking flow of a head that it ain't even funny. But anyway, see the two cutters? This one here on the left, this is for your iron. It's double cut. You can tell it's fine compared to this. This is a single cut. It's real coarse and nasty looking. This is for your soft metals like aluminum. If you try to use this on aluminum, it's just going to plug it up. On average, these tips, they run about $50 a pop, depending on where you get them. If you're only going to do this for, you know, fucking one motor, a couple motors, you know, fuck around. eBay, Harbor Freight, something like that, you can buy probably a set of these, fairly long, probably like 3 for $50. They're not going to last you a lifetime, but they'll last you for a couple motors, you know. This bit I've had for quite a while. I got it at a welding supply shop. I think it was $55. I've had it fucking years. This has done a lot of fucking heads. This one I've had 3 years. Another one that's bought at a welding supply. I lost my other one and still haven't found it, so that's out with the left sock someplace. Now to do what I'm going to do in the pockets, all I'm using is these sandpaper rolls. It's from Jegs. Push them on, tighten them down. I'll be using 80 grit just to go in there and clean up the machine work. I'm not really looking to help the flow much, even though it will, but it's not going to make a dramatic change on the flow bench. But out in the real world, it will help. So, I get the hose out and clean these up. Okay, I've got the cutter out. It's a little rougher in here than I thought. It's kind of like doing body work. You really can't see what's going on until you start doing a little bit of sanding. So I'm going to work around the guide a little bit and blend the fucking pocket and the bowl in good. I'll come back, show you later. I don't know if you can see it or not. What I'm doing is I'm removing the casting flaws. You see the seam here? I'm getting rid of that. And here you can see the intake port better. I'm going to smoothen all that out. Take the ridges and lumps out. The exhaust. You can see I tapered the end of the guides down to help the exhaust get out around it better. All I do is take the flaws out of the ports. Nothing serious. Okay. Now I'm done with this head. As you can see, I didn't get carried away. Just clean things up, smoothing everything out. You know, blended everything good. Got rid of all the lips. Now I just put it together. Now this has some pretty good seals on the fucking stems. Before you put your fucking valves in, you gotta lube them. You'll see they'll slide right in. If not, you can tear the seals. So easy that goes in. This has the Posi-Lock seals. They're Teflon. They got springs on the stems and on the guides to hold them in place. You can see. Always want to run these tight. Fuck those, the stock umbrella type. They suck. Okay. Now for some of you that want to check your spring height, which is your installed height and your pressures, to check this pressure, you're going to need a spring pressure checker, which is buried over there. You can buy a little cheap one that you put in a vise, but either way you need to have your installed height. Now this, you can go buy these. They're not bad to buy. They're a height mic, and that's what they're for. And you just wind them out and you can take a reading right off of that. Another way is just a regular caliper. Extend it out. Put it in there. And you can bring it down so you're flush with the bottom of your retainer. And see what it reads. Or the better way is it takes the human air out of it. If you can't see the bottom of that retainer and be level with it, it will fucking throw you off. If you bring this down so it contacts the top of that retainer, write the measurement down, and you measure retainer thickness, subtract that from what you just measured, and that's your installed height. Now to put the springs on, you're going to need a spring compressor. And for roller springs, you're going to need a pneumatic one, powered by air. The hand ones won't do it. Okay. Now, any of you been, even looked at magazines know what the fuck is going on here. You come to the point where you're putting your springs on. You've got your height right. You got all your shims So your spring pressure is all correct and it's all the same. Now, comes to retainers and locks. And if you look, you can see basically a straight line, imaginary line through here. And this is at an angle. This is a lock, or keeper, whatever you want to call it, and this is a retainer. These are 10-degree retainers and locks. Don't use anything less. I don't give a fuck what you're using for a fucking cam. Throw the 7 degrees right in the trash. And what that is, if you got your flat plane here, this retainer is 10 degrees. A 7 degree is, of course, 7 degrees. It has less angle. Now when that's on, that spring's trying to push that up and out. And that hard fucking angle on that retainer is keeping that spring in place. For a 10-degree lock, that spring can't push that retainer through that lock. Where a 7 degree, it can. So, piece of advice, I've seen it happen. Take the 7-degree retainers and throw them in the fucking trash and get 10. As you can see, this can be a fucking pain in the ass to do. Sucks to get your fucking fingers pinched in those, and I have, so I'm kind of leery of them. But there it is. One head done. The installed height's all correct. Spring pressures are all the same thanks to a couple shims. The ports are cleaned up. It's been washed and it's ready to go. Okay, here's the lifters. They're hydraulic rollers. Brand new out of the package. Now, like everything else, you want to make sure they're clean. So take some brake cleaner and blast brake cleaner down in here and spin that little fucking wheel a few times and clean it good. Then lube it yourself. Make sure there's no shit. And as you see, they're brand new. I just dug a piece of shit out of that fucking cup right there. So don't leave nothing to chance. You know, don't assume that these are fucking perfect. Don't assume the block you got back from the machine shop's perfect and ready to go. And everything that you paid them to do has been done. Double check everything. Learn how to do it. Okay. Now I sent the heads up machine shop and had them flowed. These heads flow really good. I don't have the paper on me. I flowed them before and after. And I get a good gain in the mid-range lift. These heads will support a 500 horse motor. They start dropping off around 0.6 lift. But that's fine because the cam in this is only a 5.10 lift. It's 5 on the intake, 5.10 on the exhaust. But the key thing is at 0.400 lift, 0.300 they flow good, but really 0.4 and 0.5 they flow fucking really good. At 0.4 they're flowing 232 CFM. Rule of thumb, you double what they flow and that's the horsepower that motor is capable of making. You know, if they're only flowing 100 and something, like say 158, you're not going to make 500 horse. You're only going to make fucking 3. A lot of people fucking get caught up in the peak flow. They say these peaked at, say they flow 300 CFM at 0.6. Well, that means it's capable of making, in a perfect world, 600 horse. But if you're only running like a 0.5 lift cam, 0.6 don't matter. Another thing, that's max lift. That fucking valve is at max lift that quick. What you want to concern yourself is what it's flown before and after. If you've got a cam that's 0.6 lift, and these flow at 3 CFM at 6. But before and after, say in the 4 area, they don't flow good. Well, in the streets, that's going to hurt you. Because not only is that valve flowing when it's open and opening, it's also flowing while it's closing. So take advantage. That's why I like the long rods, because the piston dwell. It'll allow it to fucking flow more and fill the chambers better. I'm not, this cam, not really going for horsepower. This motor's, I'm kind of more concerned on torque. If I did, say, the 284 Extreme cam in this, instead of the 270, or even the 290 cam, this would make 500 horse fucking easily. And it'd still make good torque, but it'd all be up high in the RPM scale. I want it down low. I want to make fucking torque right off idle with this fucking thing, because it's going in a big car. As you can see, I got this head all on. I'm going to walk you through the other one. I don't know if I'll do it tonight or what the fuck I'm going to do, but anyway, I'll walk you through putting on the other one. Adjusting the lifters, putting on the stud girdle. Okay, put your gasket in place. Some of them will have up on it. If I have to tell you to put that up, you need to just go kill yourself. Make sure the heads are clean. I'll wash these off with a chemical and a blowgun. Set it in place and they'll drop down on your fucking pegs. Now, if you guys are running aluminum heads, very fucking important. One, use the correct gasket. Yes, they do make gaskets for aluminum heads. If you're not building a crazy motor, you can get away with running a stock gasket. 2, you have to use the bolts for aluminum heads. You can't use your stock bolts. 1, most of the time they don't fit in the pockets. 2, they're too short. You're not going to get a good clamping load. Now this is what the average bolt looks like for an aluminum head. And they come with hardened washers. Now some washers, like the ARPs, which these are not, by the way, you'll see a chamfer on the fucking inside hole. That chamfer goes up, and it goes up to your head. Real simple, but they don't tell you that in the directions. So just remember, when you wash it, your chamfer faces up to your fucking bolt head. Lube them with the ARP lube, or assembly lube, and torque them to the factory specs on the fucking bolts, not your fucking manufacturer of your motor. I think ARPs, like the cheap ones, are fucking, I think they're 70 pounds, and I think factory are 65. And if you don't use the ARP lube and you use oil, it's a different torque spec. I don't remember what the fuck it was, but I think it was a little bit more, like 75. But anyway, as you can see, these come with a sealer on them, because they go into water jackets. You've got a handful of fucking short ones, you got some medium ones, then you got a couple in-between ones for your ends. Now, you want to put the lube under the washer and on the washer. And what the lube does is allow you to get a correct torque reading. Because without it, I mean, if you can pull on it and spin it, you'll feel the friction. And with the lube, it spins nice and gives you a correct torque reading. So remember, both sides of that washer gets lubed. Okay, now you might have a problem in here. Your two springs. They're pretty good sized diameter springs. And the washer won't go down in between them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp them in a pair of vice grips. Just this one washer. And grind flat spots on the sides. So I can go down between them. There's the washer. It's still a little tight, so I'm going to put some more clearance in it. Ground a little more off from it. And fits right in. You don't want to force nothing on a fucking motor when you're doing this. Okay, now it's time to do the guide plates and studs. Yeah, you can see it. You can see this stud just goes into an empty hole. But your intake studs, a lot of aftermarket heads, go into your port. See the light coming through the intake port? You need to seal this stud. If you don't, you can suck oil down through it, around the threads and into your intake, and you don't want to do that. Somewhere. I use a sealer on it, and I don't know what the fuck I did with it. Hold on, I gotta find it. Okay, I found it. This is what I use. I use two-stroke guides. Now remember the Yama bond? It's a form of gasket that doesn't harden. And that's basically all this is. You can use it between, in your skidoo cases, dirt bike cases where they don't require a gasket, they require a sealer. This is what they use. And speaking of skidoos, I'm going to have to do my Polaris pretty soon, so that's probably going to be the next video once this shit's done and out of here. I lost a crankshaft in it a couple winters ago and haven't had a chance to fix it yet, so. It snowed yesterday, so I got to get my fingers out of my ass and get on that. Okay. Now I'm setting up a guide plate right now. And like before, you want them lined up, just like we had when we were checking for piston and valve clearance. Then tighten it down. Now, I think I showed you before. You'll see on the fulcrum on these fucking roller rockers that one edge is just smooth and sharp. The other edge has a countersunk shelf on it. That goes up. Just like that. And that shelf is for your fucking lock to sit into. Now, another note. These are comp fucking roller rockers, by the way. It's comp cam. Not pro comp or anything like that. His old motor that I tore apart had these on them. These are Proform rockers. Honestly, they're a fucking piece of shit. But I was going to try to use them, try to save the guys some money, but the locks don't fit because, well, they're Taiwan shit, fucking piece of crap built stuff. And to get them to fit, I would have to grind the whole gut out of this fucking thing. There'd be nothing left to it. They take their own locks, can't use them, so I bought the comp ones. This guy wants me to do another motor for him, so I'll probably use them on that because it's not going to get a roller cam with a stud girdle. If I was just using a hydraulic cam in this, flat tap it without the stud girdle, I'd have used those fucking Proforms and called it done. And just use the locks that came on it. Now, again, we want this adjusted to line up to the tip of the fucking rocker to be centered in the valve. And that's what's good about these fucking plates. And you can adjust them. So we're centered right there. We're good there. So now I gotta hold this in place and the guide and tighten that fucking stud down, and I'm done there. Then I just gotta do that to all of them. And I'll be back. Now I shouldn't have to tell you this, but I'm gonna, because I've seen it happen. When you're putting your push rods in, and it's kind of hard to see with these lifters, but make sure they go down in the cup. Not sitting out here on the ridge. You want them down in that cup. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to adjust your lifters. Mechanical and hydraulics are different. Mechanical, you set with a feeler gauge. Hydraulics is lifter plunge depth. First, you got to know which one to adjust. Now, as you do this, the more knowledge you consume, and the better you can get. Like, you can adjust number 1, number 6, and you can bounce around and adjust certain ones at certain times. I don't suggest doing that. I always do them one at a time, right in a row. It requires turning the motor over more, takes longer to do, but there's no fuck-ups. Okay. What you want to do is start on the exhaust on number 1. This side's already done, so we're coming over to the passenger side bank. So we're going to do a number 2. Because remember, it's even and odd. Number 1's over here and 2 is over here. Now, this being the intake port, this is your intake rocker. So therefore, this is your intake side right here. Exhaust, exhaust. So what you want to do is on the one that you're adjusted, right, you want to rotate the motor in its normal direction, which is clockwise. And when that exhaust starts to lift, see it coming up? You want to stop. And that's when you adjust your intake. Now it's kind of hard to see with a roller cam because of this. If it's a regular flat tap of hydraulic, you could be able to see what I'm doing really easily. But down in here you got the plunger. And that's what your push rod sets in. You got plenty of play in this push rod. Now what you want to do, a lot of people say you want to spin the push rod till it stops, and that's zero clearance, but that's bullshit. Depending on what you have for lube, how much lube, how strong you are, and how much force you're putting on that fucking rod to make it spin. So what I want you to do is take the free play out of it, up and down. When there's no movement up and down, call that zero last right there. And you get in here with a light, and you adjust that fucking thing, which is clockwise. Tighten that down until you see the plunger draw 30 thousandths. Now I know you can't see that, but you only want 30 thousandths, 20 to 30 thousandths plunger drop, or preload if that's what you want to call it, which I guess is probably the correct fucking term. No more than that. That's only about probably half a turn from zero. Okay, I had to charge the battery. I've got all these done. I saved the exhaust for you on number 2. As you can see, I have my set screw way up. And that's how I know if these been done or not. See, the other ones are way down in. They've already been adjusted. How do I know? Because the fucking set screw is not up top. I've already got it screwed down in and locked. Now to do on your exhaust side, now what you have to do is roll the motor over in your normal direction to your intake valve. Opens all the way, and it's down this down closing stroke. Now you can see the exhaust opening there. Now the intake is opening, as you see, it's with your intake port. When you're doing your valve lash, your valve settings, ideally what you want to be is on the base circuit of your cam. Let me grab a fucking cam. Now see, we have the lobes. Get away from the furnace. You know, now when you're adjusting your valve, your lifter wants to be here, not out in this area. It wants to be in this area, at its lowest point, and it wants to be on your base circle. So, what we got to do? Now there, the intake is open. Now you see it's closing, but not all the way. You want to stop right there. Get all the play. You want to take that play out. Now half a turn will be from here to here. Now you hold this with a wrench. Wind that in with an Allen wrench until it hits your fucking stud. Then go a little bit more with your Allen wrench. Lock that in place. Okay, now this next thing gotta do is put the stud girdle on. This is a no-brainer. Although I have seen a professionally built 3D3 that had stud girdles that were on wrong. He had them down too low. The rockers were hitting them. But obviously, you don't want your rockers hitting them. You gotta have clearance when the valve is closed, and you gotta have it when it's open. Right? You just push it down over your fucking poly locks. And some poly locks actually have a lock ring on them. And you just push that down onto that lock ring. And the lock ring ones go on the ends. The rest don't have them. But once you get it located, you just lock it into place. Okay, now some of you are wondering, well, what the fuck is that thing? What's it do? How can I explain this to you? Let me put you on the fucking tripod. Now that stud girdle stops the studs from wobbling. Metal fatigue? That ring a bell to you? Work hardened. You know, you can take a spoon and bend it a few times and it snaps. Well, that's what metal does. It work hardens, it gets brittle, and breaks. Now, on a flat tap of hydraulic cam, like that one I just had, where the fuck it is. I already put it away. On a flat tap of hydraulic or a solid, your lobes are kind of like that. You know, they're just rounded. So that valve goes up and it closes. It needs a certain amount of spring pressure, so when that closes, that fucking valve and lifter will follow the profile of the cam. Now a roller cam is more like this. It snaps the valve open, and that fucking valve has to snap shut so it doesn't hit your piston. To do that, they need a strong spring pressure. So here we got a row of studs. You got your rocker on it. Now this spring is trying to push this way on that rocker, and your cam is trying to push this way. Now that cam has to overpower that spring so that rocker arm will rock. You following along? Push rods want to flex because it's just a straight rod that's trying to be pushed on, and they want to flex. So it's important to have good ones. Now we got a 3/8 stud. When this pushes that way, it wants to flex that rocker stud. So at an RPM, the rocker studs are actually doing this inside that motor. Now what that stud girl does is tie them all together. So they can't do that. They'll stay straight and they won't break. The chances of this motor actually breaking a stud, pretty slim. It's just a street motor. It's not being raised. But for $45 fucking dollars, I'm putting one on it. So I know they're not going to break. Okay, now we got to put the intake on. It's straightforward. I just pre-fit it. The intake gaskets on this motor are pretty thick. The intake sets up quite a ways. Now, I normally don't use the end seals. I usually run a bead of silicone. But where it's such a big gap, I'm going to put these in. Before you use these, like any rubber or plastic part, it has a release agent on it to get it out of the mold. I don't know, it's like a waxy silicone type of thing. So you gotta wash these really good with a chemical like brake cleaner. I'm going to use lacquer thinner. I dunk it, rub it really good, and you'll feel the sliminess kind of come off from it, and it'll get almost like grip your thumb. Not sticky, but you're not going to want to slide really good on it. Dry it off, put silicone there, put the seal in place, silicone on the top, put blobs in each corner before and after. I'll show you anyway. And they make two different types. You get the blocks with the holes in them, which these little rubber dinks go into. And that supposedly stops it from moving. And it will if you get a good PCV. Then you got the other type that just set over the block. I myself don't really like these tight, but they do work if you clean them and glue them down, just like these. Okay, as you can see, I get the blobs in the corner with a small bead. I've dabbed some around my ports and smeared it, just like I did the timing cover. Okay, there. Now, if you've been following along step by step, you've basically just assembled the fucking first motor. I really wanted to kind of get technical with this, try to teach you something, but at the same time, I don't want to. You know, I'm afraid it's going to confuse you, or you're going to overthink it a little bit too much. That tends to be the case with a lot of people building the motors. They get in over their head. And you can see I put just bolt a lift plate to it to keep shit out of the motor, and same with the fucking vacuum port. I'm going to drop the distributor in it pretty soon. I'll show you how to do that too. You got to do it before you put the valve covers on, or you can do it by putting your finger in the spark plug hole, the number 1, and cranking it over until you get pressure. Then once you're at top dead center, put it in. So right now I'm going to flip it upside down and deal with the oil pump and the oil pan. Okay, now, before I put the oil pan on, what I like to do, and I recommend doing it, these are new rods, new rod bolts. They haven't been through fucking cycles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a ratchet and back all these off one at a time. I'm just going to loosen this fucking cap up. I mean, well, the bolts. I'm not going to loosen the cap. I'm just going to back the bolts off. I'm going to break them free, back them off a turn. Then I'm going to retorque them one by one. And what that does is it puts it through another stretch cycle. If these were used, like say I just rebuilt this motor, didn't put new bolts in it, like I'm going to do with the mains, I'm just going to check the retorque them. I'm going to run through real quick with a torque wrench on it. But new bolts, they tend to stretch. They've gone through a torque cycle already, the machine shop. My machinist torqued them to specs and checked the sizes, the big end size, and ran them through the fucking sizing machine. Then I backed them off, took the caps off, put them in, and torqued them down. So they've been torqued twice, to my knowledge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back them off again and torque them down the third time. It just gives me a peace of mind that they've been stretched and they're torqued to specs. The other way is a torque stretch gauge. It's a rod bolt stretch gauge. Way too technical for you. But basically what it does is it clamps on your bolt. You can use a wrench and tighten it to your bolt stretch to say 9/1000ths of an inch. Then it's torqued to specs. You can use a torque angle gauge. I've got one somewhere. I don't use it much. But anyway, that's what I do before I put the pan on. Is I grab the torque wrench and check them all, just to make sure they haven't settled. But right now I'm going to put the pump on. I got to find the drive for it, clean everything up, and put the pump on. Make sure my pickup's level, measure the depth of it, and tack weld it in place. Okay, now once you get your pump in place, it's not bolted on, by the way. It's just sitting on the fucking locating pins. Right. Now what you gotta do is you gotta get your pickup level with the block. You don't want it up or down. Okay. Now I gotta say, now that you get your pickup parallel to your fucking pan rail, what you want to do is measure your depth. So all you're doing is basically put a straight edge across that. We've got, call it 6.5. Actually, it'd be 6 3/8 between the bottom of the pickup to the block. Now you want roughly 1/4 of an inch between your oil pan and your pickup. So now you got to go over and put the straight edge on your pan and measure down to the bottom of it. And the difference of that measurement is what you have for clearance. Now if you want to figure in your gasket thickness, measure the thickness of your gasket and subtract it from your measurement. And that's what your fucking clearance will be. Okay, now that you've got your pickup where you want it, it's level, and you think you're ready to install the pump. You got to tack weld your pickup to your oil pump. I have seen these come off, and when that happens, you lose all your oil. Now you're not looking to seal this fucking thing, so you don't have to weld all the way around it, people. Just one good tack is all you need. There, it's that simple. Just one good tack, and as you can see, you don't get hot. If you're worried about heat, you can pull this pin and take the guts out of here, because there's a spring, and if it gets too hot, you can actually lose that spring tension, which is your oil pressure. But just do one good tack. You're not going to make enough heat to fuck with that spring. and you're going to stop this from falling off. I want to note that this is just a stock oil pump. It's not a high volume. I've talked about these before while I was doing this motor. It's getting a stock oil pan. It's a street motor, so all my clearances are tight, my bearings. Stock oil port size. The only thing I did was a little chamfering on the crank, and that was it. I don't need a high volume oil pump on this motor. In fact, they usually do more harm. One, they take some horsepower to turn. But the biggest thing, you're running a stock pan, it's only a few quarts of oil. And if you race the motor all, when you get up around 4,500 RPM with a stock pump, there's no loss in your oil pan, basically. A high volume pump, it pumps a lot of oil. And the faster you spin it, the more oil it will pump. So around 4,500 RPM, not like a mischief, but like a constant 4,500 RPM and higher, you can start sucking a stock oil pan dry. Because all your oil is going to be up in your valve covers, trying to find its way back down to your motor. I've seen some motors get lost because of it. Don't need it. Honest, you know, it's a stock pan, run a stock pump. Now, had I gone in and opened up port sizes and, you know, done a lot of oil system modifications, then yes, I'd have put a high volume pump on it. But I haven't. Everything's stock in the oil system. Run a stock pump. If this was a high volume, a big quart something pan, like a 7-quart pan, then yeah, you could run a high volume pump and not hurt the fucking oil. You know, hurt your bearings. You won't run over oil. But I recommend a stock pump on the streets. You don't need anything more. Okay, before you put the pan on, it's a good idea to stick a dipstick that you're going to use in and check relations of empty to full. Now this is one of those cheesy chrome aftermarket ones, which I don't have it set all the way in yet because I want to seal this with a silicone before I knock it all the way in. So you figure that's going to go down, what, 3/8 of an inch? But you put that stick about here, so that's pretty accurate. You know, that says empty, it's empty. Then once you add on the thickness of the oil pan gasket, so with this stick seated all the way, it'd be about here. So yeah, that's good enough to call it empty. Now, before you put the silicone to it in your gasket, you're going to wash the surface. I already washed this with lacquer. So it's clean, it's ready to take the silicone. You know, you'll take some paint up, no big deal. But get the surfaces clean. And like the timing cover, actually like the intake, put blobs in each corner. Then do a layer on everything. Put the end seals in your gaskets in place. Then do again with the silicone, a blob in each corner, and just a thin layer to seal it. Then put the oil pan on and tighten it down. Don't over tighten it. It's real easy to do. Now I got everything ready to go for the oil pan. I just got to dig it out, clean all the shit out of it, make sure there's no dirt, particles in it, whatnot. And I'll be back. Okay. Put blobs in your corner, and like everything else, put a thin layer on, and smear it out. You just want to seal the gasket. Now on the end seals, do the same thing. I put a blob in there. And I put some in here, but I don't smear it with my finger. I leave it thick. And those you just push down into place. So that just pushes down in like that. And the front one, same way. Put it in, push it down so you see the... Okay. Now, like everything else for the oil pan, put it in place, get all your bolts in and start it just, a few threads by hand. You don't want to put one in and tighten it down because your gasket's not going to be lined up. So get them all in and started. And again, work from your center outward. So tighten it, in here. The other side, then tighten these few, go to the other side, tighten those same few on that side, and keep going. Now when you tighten them, even if you are strong as Hercules, you don't need to use it. It's very easy to over tighten it, especially with a cork gasket. What I do is I bring it down so it's snug, it doesn't want to turn. Then I do a quarter turn. If you see your gasket squishing out, stop. You've got it too tight. You should see Permatex squeezing out though, especially in your corners. But you should see it all along. There. So that's it. Not so hard, is it? Just gonna put a fuel pump rod in it, put the plate in it. I gotta dig it out and clean it first. There you got the fuel pump plate on. This is straightforward. Lubricate your pump rod, slide it in, silicone, the gasket, silicone, the plate. These bolts are used to hold the pump in. I'm just using it to hold the plate till it dries. I'll take these out, silicone this, gasket, silicone, fuel pump, and bolt it back down. Yeah, it's done. I gotta take the baffles out of the valve covers because they won't clear with a stud girdle. They're kind of big. And I don't even think the depth would be right for them anyway. But we're gonna take the baffles out of the fucking valve covers and put them on it, and it's done. It's hopefully gonna go on a dyno. I don't know. I really want it to. I'd also like to do a chassis dyno after, just to see how much fucking you lose to the drivetrain. But anyway, that was going to go on one dyno, whether it's the engine or the chassis or both. So there it is. So if you followed along, you can actually see it's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. The key to longevity of a motor is the machine work. If the machine works on, an intelligent monkey can put it together. I mean, all you're doing is following torque specs. It's not hard. There's a lot I didn't get in with you on this fucking things. I want to keep it simple, just a good street motor. I might be doing a Chevy for myself because I have the parts. I don't know if I'm gonna, because I had no use for the fucking motor. But it's something to do, So I was thinking about doing one for myself, and if I do, there's no rush on it, and I can fucking take every step with you. It's going to be more of a race-orientated build, but it's going to be a street motor. But I'm going to modify the oil passages, get involved in the heads. Speaking of heads, what the fuck did I do with that? Here's a spec on these heads right now. This is what these heads flow. Now, as you can see, we're at 255. So in theory, in a perfect world in theory, is if you double what your heads flow, that's what you can make for horsepower. Not saying you're going to make it, but that's what you know, those heads are capable of making 500 horse. Right? Now the cam in this fucking motor is a ½ inch lift, which is 0.5 thousandths. On the intake, 510 exhaust. 0.6, we're flowing at 264. Now as you can see, at 4, they're flowing 232. They flow really good between 4 and 5. Now if you look at the cam card, where does it tell you? No, not showing you not showing you the closing positions. Oh yeah, here we go. Now if you look here, you'll see that the intake valve opens. It's 32 degrees open before top dead center. And that valve closes 64 degrees after bottom dead center. Now these heads, when this motor's running and flowing, is moving air all the way from 0 up to here. It's only going to reach this point very briefly in its fucking cycle. I mean, it's so you can barely measure it. Then it starts closing. Well, as it's closing, it's still filling. Air is still coming in. So what's important is the flow in this area. And we're flowing 232, which is really good. What it's going to make for horsepower, I don't know. I'm concerned more with torque. But it ought to be a handful on the streets, especially with the 4-speed. Because you can control the RPM that you let the clutch out. You know, if you roll this thing down, in first gear at, say, 10 miles an hour, grab second gear and dump the fucking clutch, shit's going to happen. I'm kind of anxious to see it go. I know the owner is fucking, he's been up my ass because he wants to take it out and run the shit out of it. But anyway, I'm going to cut the fucking baffles out of the valve covers. I gotta go get plugs, get the PCV thing. Not sure what we're gonna do yet for a carburetor. I don't know if I'm gonna build one or if I'm just gonna have the guy buy one. But anyway, if I build one, I'll walk you through that. I gotta get some bolts for the timing cover. Like I said, I'm gonna get some Allen head bolts. Get rid of those crappy ass fucking things. Just so you know, you have to have a plug in here or a bolt, because that goes into your fuel pump push rod. If you don't plug it, it will leak oil. A lot of people hook a ground strap to it. A short bolt will work. You can't have one too long, it can go and hit your rod. You just need a short one. Little Permatex on it or something and wind it in. But anyway, there you go.